Hello, it's me, Fidiscus Jiskick. If you're brand new to Advance Wars, it can be difficult to know what you should be building from your unit producing facilities. If you haven't played the campaign modes on cartridge, you don't really know what any of these units do. You might not even really understand how units work, so I'm here to give you a rundown on unit basics and the specifics of each unit. I'm not going to go into the real gritty detail, but if you're ever interested in that, you can check the charts under the info tab on Advanced Wars by Web. It has a wealth of information that is nice to know. But if you're just trying to get into the game, you don't know what units do, you want to know how those work, I'm here to tell you about that. So, first things first, units all have 100 health. And as they lose their health, they lose their combat efficacy. So a tank at 50% health can only deal 50% as much damage as a tank at full health. A tank at 50% health will also take more damage than a tank at 100% health. Even though units have 100 health, it's only represented as a fraction of 10. So a unit with somewhere between 91 and 100 health will have no number next to it. A unit with somewhere between 1 and 10 health will have a 1 next to it. A unit that's displaying a 5, for example, has somewhere between 41 and 50% health. When you engage in combat with another unit, you can see that it's a 5 to 13, and that number is significant because that is dealing health, like actual health points rather than represented health points. So you can be sure that you can actually do the math and find out always if something will kill, because if you know that it has 100 health points rather than whatever it's showing. That's the long and short of it. So the way that combat works generally is you have to move close to a unit, and then you attack it, and then it will attack your unit back with its updated health value. Like I said, since units lose combat efficacy as they lose health, since your opponent will be counterattacking you with lower health, presumably, that means that getting a first strike is the most important combat tactic in Advance Wars. It's critical if you want to be successful at Advance Wars that you plan to get first strikes. Other than combat, units have stats for their ammo, so that's how many times it can fire its main weapon before needing to be resupplied. It has fuel, so that's how far it can travel before it needs to be resupplied. If a ground vehicle runs out of fuel, it will not be able to move anymore. If a plane or a boat runs out of fuel, it will crash into the ground and be destroyed. There are different movement types. There's units that move on foot, there's units that are wheeled, there's treaded vehicles, there are planes, and there are two types of boats. There are sea boats and there are landers. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm not going to go through all the detail of that, but it's important to know that not all movement is created equal in Advance Wars. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about like unit producing facilities and the actual units. Some of this might be like cross-referential, so feel free to inflate my viewing numbers if you don't understand the first time. Just give it a second pass or a third pass. I think that each time that you are exposed to this information, it might make more sense. But if I start talking about one thing, I might not have talked about what it's going to fight well or something, and if you watch it again, it'll make more sense. Just like that sentence will. Anyways, this is a base. This house looking thing. The base produces ground units, all of these guys you see here. Bases are super important because your ground units are the only units that can increase your income, specifically these two guys. By capturing properties, you can increase your income. You can increase your unit output by capturing like neutral bases, and your neutral bases can produce more units that will increase your income, which is super critical. Also, since infantry are the cheapest unit in the game, and any unit can only attack one other unit in Advance Wars, you can be generally sure that if you have a unit lead, you are doing something right. Your opponent's not going to be able to kill your entire. It's literally not possible your opponent to kill your entire army if you have more units than them. Generally, I would say try to produce from every base every turn, no matter what. Even if it's only infantry, it's better to produce lots of infantry generally than it is to produce one expensive unit. And if you ever see a neutral base like this one on the map, then you probably want to find a way to path towards it first. This is probably the most common beginner mistake, as not capturing your neutral base first and base skipping to try to afford more expensive units, where at best they're going to kill one thing per turn. So infantry, like I said, they can capture neutral properties, which makes them unique. The fact that they're able to increase your income is really, really important. They're cheap, so they're good meat shields. They don't have bad movement. It's 3, and they move on foot. Moving on foot means they can move through mountains or rivers. Moving on a mountain takes 2 movements, so normally it would be 1, 2, 3 spaces it can move, but a mountain is 1, 2, and then it can't move onto another mountain because that would also take 2. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. Can't do that because he doesn't have 4 movement. If I try to move onto this tile, you'll always see that he passed through the plains because that's 1, 2, 3 rather than 1, 2, and then theoretically 3, 4 that way. It's the same with the river. It takes 2 movement. Other than that, infantry, you'll be attacking with them a lot into targets that they aren't very good against, like tanks, just because sometimes you'll need them to finish stuff off. Infantry fight infantry pretty well, unsurprisingly. They're a good counter to mechs because of the cost difference. Mechs are technically a little bit stronger, but generally infantry will win out in cost. And that's really all there is. Try to produce as many infantry as you can. Don't skip out on building infantry. That's super, super critical. You always want an excess of infantry because you can't actually better your position in the game without them. So, mechs. Mechs have 2 movement. It's the lowest in the game, but they don't have any kind of cost for moving over any given terrain. So unlike the infantry, which cannot move from the mountain into the river, this mech actually can. You can see that. He can move from mountain to mountain. He can move 2 spaces no matter what. This 2 spaces, it's not very much. He's very, very slow. He has a bazooka. That makes him pretty decent at shooting at tanks or at other vehicles, but he's too slow to actually be able to catch them. So he needs some help. We'll talk about that help later. They're very defensive units because of how slowly they move. They can capture properties, but you almost will never do it because you want him to be in places where he can protect stuff, and if he can shoot at stuff, then he's much higher value than infantry. He's very cost effective if he does get to shoot at a tank. That's mechs. Sometimes you might want to use him if you are going to make use of like his ability to cross rivers and mountains and stuff, but generally not a super critical unit. Recons. Recons are mostly used in like fog of war games because they see really far. But they're actually pretty subpar like combat vehicles. They hit infantry pretty hard, but they cannot fight tanks like at all. They cost 4,000 funds, which is quite a lot considering that like tanks are 7,000, and we'll get to tanks. Recons have wheels, which means that they have very, very far movement if they can move on roads or shoals, but they cannot move through plains easily. You can see that if I move onto these plains, it really limits how far he can move, whereas he can move super far this way. If he moves through forests, it's like impossible. It's just not gonna work. It's good if you have a lot of tanks. You can attack infantry with it, and then you can protect it with your tanks, which is a big deal because infantry won't be able to swing into this. But really, if you're a new player, I would try to avoid building recons unless you're playing Fog of War. And if you're a beginner, I'd also avoid playing Fog of War. So, APCs. APCs don't have weapons. You can see that he cannot attack any of these units at all. They are used for transporting other units. They can transport infantry. You can see that you can load this infantry or this mech into the APC, and then you can move it somewhere and then unload it. So you use APCs mostly for moving mechs around so that they can be useful and defend your other units. Another critical thing that APCs can do is they can supply other units. So if other units are running out of ammunition or fuel, you can park an APC next to it and supply the unit. That's very, very critical for employing some other types of units like stealths and mega tanks. Are very expensive, but have limitations for fuel and ammo, so you'll need to deploy those with APCs. Otherwise, I wouldn't say that APCs are especially useful. They can speed up some captures if you are really smart, but if you're a beginner, then I would just not worry about it. They are kind of squishy. It looks like a big brick, but it doesn't really get protected like a brick. It actually dies even to infantry pretty quickly. It's important if you want to use some other units, but I would mostly avoid APCs as a beginner. Artilleries. Artilleries are the most basic ranged unit. The APC is treaded, so you can see that it doesn't have the same issues that the recon does when it comes to planes. So that's the last thing about that. The artillery. Artillery is a ranged unit, so you can see that it can hit these things without needing to move. It can't attack air units. It is only able to attack grounded units. If you park it near the sea, then it can attack boats, but it's really important that it has range and that it's able to not be counterattacked. It does a ton of damage. You can see that these numbers are very, very high. So that's really good, but if something were to attack it, like if this tank were to drive up right here and hit it, then it would be taking a lot of damage as well. So you can see that this would do about as much damage as the artillery would to it, and it does not get a counterattack because it can't hit things at close range. So there's that. Artillery are really good for protecting your other units. If you form a wall around your artillery, and that wall doesn't get breached, then it's very difficult to attack that wall because your opponents will be afraid to move into the range of your artillery. It has a dead zone of 1, so it can't hit here, 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 or here. And it can attack things that are 2 or 3 units away from it. So 1, 2, it can attack. 3, it can attack. Could not attack something here or here. 1, 2, 3, it could attack something here. If you move it, you can see its range by double clicking on it. That's artillery. It's cheap, which is really good, and if you have a unit lead, ranged units are very, very strong because you can create powerful walls and your opponent can't kill more than 1 unit of that wall with one of their units. So the way that the math plays out, you're just going to be able to use your artillery to punish them if they ever try. Alright, tanks. Tanks are the basic armor unit. These are what most armies are really made of. This is your bread and butter fighting unit. You can see that it hits this tank pretty hard as long as it gets a first strike, and it destroys this infantry basically. It doesn't hit B-copters super well, and it'll die to heavier armor, but for its cost, the tank is just extremely good. It's super fast, so that's like why mechs have such huge amounts of trouble keeping up with something like this. You can just see that, you know, when it's twice as fast, then that's like basically an exponential problem in a turn-based game. Usually the way that you're going to deal with tanks is by having more tanks. So if I were to, you know, attack this tank and then 2 full health tanks would attack this next turn, then that would be a big issue for me. That's this is one of the important units for rock paper scissors in Advanced Wars. The weapons triangle is something like tanks beat anti-air, anti-airs beat copters, and copters beat tanks. But tanks also beat more different things, and tanks don't get beat by copters so hard as copters get beat by anti-air, or so hard as anti-air get beat by tanks. So tanks are the most important member of that triangle. It's not like a perfect triangle, it's like a isosceles triangle or something. Tanks, really good. Recommend building them when you can. Building the first tank in a game is a big deal. Having the first turn where you can build 2 tanks is a big deal. They're important. Anti-airs, they move just as far as tanks, but they mostly are used for beating copters. As you can see, this copter is dead and then some thanks to this anti-air. Any kind of air unit, anti-air is going to win out against. So these are really, really critical for protecting your army against air units. You generally want you probably just want 1 anti-air near your main force of tanks to protect them. It shreds infantry as well. You might notice that this anti-air hits these infantry harder than a tank does. It's very effective at destroying infantry. That is another notable use of them, but they actually lose pretty hard to tanks. You can see here it's 58 to 66%, and it does almost nothing on the counterattack. So yeah, it's important, but it's not as strong as tanks. This is the medium tank. The medium tank is slower by 1 than a regular tank, but it's much heavier. You can see that the medium tank is able to it's almost invulnerable to tanks when it gets a first strike. It can fight this other medium tank pretty easily, which was not possible for this tank. You can see that the light tank just can't really fight into it. Even if it was to attack this battlecopter, which isn't well suited to do, it doesn't necessarily lose. The battlecopter can't exactly fight the medium tank all that well when it's at full health. When it's a little bit lower, then it's a lot easier. Mechs also don't really fight medium tanks all that well. For the cost, this is a good trade, but it doesn't feel good when you do it. I'll tell you that. They're just slower. That's the only trade-off, and they're very expensive. I would consider this like a late game unit in most games. There might come a time where you're building like one a turn, but if there's also going to be times where rather than building a medium tank, you're going to want to build 2 regular tanks just because the movement, and because if you build a medium tank, you're generally going to be locked to building like infantry other places. The Neo tank is a heavier tank. It has the same movement stats as a normal tank, but it's more expensive than the medium tank, but I'm not really sure that it justifies its cost. You can see that it does hit harder than the medium tank did, but not like that much harder. You know, I don't really know if this is worth however much more. Like, this is a increase of 6,000 funds. Not really sure if that's worth it. Defensively, it's pretty similar. It's a little bit more tanky, but it's not that much more tanky. You can see that, like, you know. Yeah, like this medium tank hits them basically the same. So, if you need the extra movement, the Neo tank is great to have. Otherwise, I would stick to medium tanks generally. Mega tanks, they move even slower than medium tanks, but they absolutely destroy anything that they touch. You can see that there's no way that this mega tank would not obliterate a regular tank. It completely obliterates medium tanks. I'm pretty sure that it completely obliterates Neo tanks. It's just very, very slow. And it only has 3 ammo in its main gun. So if you want to really make use of it, you're probably going to need to deploy it with an APC. Otherwise, it'll run out of ammo pretty quick. And you won't be able to fire. You won't be able to like utilize its firepower. Rockets. Rockets are a longer range unit than artillery. They have a little bit more firepower, which is kind of neat. They're quite expensive. I think 15,000 funds, if I'm not mistaken. And they go on wheels, which really limits how useful they can be. Even though it has very long range, it's between 3 and 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is as far as it can reach. It couldn't hit anything. It couldn't hit this Neo tank or this pipe runner, for example. Or if this was one over, I can just weight it and you can see. Yeah, like that. You can see that it has a dead zone of 2. Here's another rocket, and you can see its dead zone of 2. It's very powerful, but because of its limited movement, it's maybe not really worth it. And it's like a similar situation between the medium tank and Neo tank, where like the regular artillery is so effective, and the few ways that the few things that you're trading for rockets really kind of limits how useful they can be. Missiles are they're like rockets, but they're only for anti-air. They absolutely destroy things in the air. They're very good at hitting them, but they have the same problem that rockets do, where they move on wheels, which is a real issue. And they can only hit air units, which is really not so hot. They have the same range. You can use these to lock your opponent's airports. If you move them, 5 units away and they are just touching the tip of the airport, they basically can't build anything on the airport. The missiles will shoot it down. That's pretty good. Other than that, you probably won't see these unless they're pre-built. You might see them in the final turn of a game when somebody's about to resign, or if they know that they can win that turn, then you might see them. But that's kind of like the pipe runner. The pipe runner is a weird unit. It can only move on pipes. You're not going to build it unless you're trying to show off that you won a game. It can hit both air units and ground units, which is pretty impressive. It's just mostly limited by the fact that it only moves on pipes. It does have a dead zone of 1, like that. So it's got a range of 4 to 5, or 2 to 5. Yeah. So, I mean, if you can, if you're playing a map where this is useful, go for it, whatever. You would need an APC to refuel this. It has 9 ammo. I don't know a whole lot about these in combat, so that's all I'll say, is that it's not going to be able to move on to like a factory, or to it's not going to be able to move on to a city, so that it can't get refueled except by APCs. That's a big deal. All right, on to airports. Airports build planes and copters. Not a huge surprise. The only way to refuel planes and copters is by parking them on friendly airports. They'll get 2 HP that you have to pay for. Whatever a fifth of their cost is, you got to pay for them to get repairs. Refueling fuel and ammunition is free, so there's that. All of the ground vehicles, except for the pipe runner, you can park on cities to refuel, so that's a big deal. Alright, so T-copters. T-copters are like APCs, but in the air you can see that these guys don't attack. You can load an infantry or a mech into these. They have similar movement to the APC, which is pretty good. Oh yeah, ground vehicles, they can't move over rivers or mountains at all. That's important. I say this because these guys can. They completely ignore any kind of terrain. They're able to move your infantry and mechs around. They cost the same as an APC, they just have different weaknesses. So obviously anti-air are going to destroy T-copters, but for the majority of their use, they're identical to APCs. They're kind of nice because you don't have to build them from a base. So I was talking about the importance of building from bases every turn. Because this build is built from an airport, you don't have to waste a base production on an APC, which is very nice. A major difference that they have between APCs is that they can't refuel stuff. So there's that. Battlecopters. B-copters are another. They're, like I said, they're a member of the weapons triangle between these three: the battlecopter, the tank, and the anti-air. So you can see that this B-copter, it moves pretty far. It ignores terrain, which is really great. It can move over these sea tiles, unlike tanks. It hits tanks quite hard, about as hard as tanks hit tanks, in fact. Please let me click on the correct. There we go. Yeah, exactly as hard as tanks hit tanks, but they take less damage from tanks. So they're very nice because they're a little bit more tanky than your average unit, or than a tank. They're a little bit better protected, but like I said, they have this critical weakness that they die instantly to anti-air. They aren't able to be attacked by artillery. I mentioned that for the artillery thing, that this artillery can't attack this battlecopter even though it's in range. So they're very good for breaking formations. It's very important that you use battlecopters sparingly to attack weak points because they are difficult to counterattack. And the main thing that limits their use is the number of anti-airs on your opponent's board. It's also worth noting that they take quite a bit of damage from other battlecopters. That's not what I wanted. Yeah, there you go. So 65 to 74% damage, leaving it at 3 or 4 HP, as opposed to like a tank versus a tank, which leaves another tank at 5 or 6 HP. Air units don't benefit from terrain. That's another thing that I didn't mention. That's pretty important, that no matter where you park this, it's going to be equally vulnerable. Moving on. Fighters are advanced anti-air units. You can see that this fighter has a huge amount of movement. It can move wherever it wants. It's got 9 movement. It can hit down here, but it can only attack air targets. It can't hit these grounded targets at all. It's an anti-air airplane. It's the fastest unit in the game. It can move 9 squares. It's not usually seen unless the opponent is building like a bomber or a stealth. It's one of the 2 units that can attack stealths, which is super important. Stealths are really busted. We'll get to those. It's also not able to be attacked by most ground units. So planes, like these 3 or 4 units, I actually don't know about black bombs. These units can't be attacked by planes at all, by tanks at all. It has to be an anti-air to attack these, or a missile. Other ground units won't be able to hit them at all. So they're pretty decent blocking units sometimes, but there is that problem that anti-air will just shred stuff like this. That they really limit how effective air units can be. Rightfully so. They're named like that. Bombers are like the opposite of fighters. They are anti-ground air units, and they will tear apart just about any grounded target. This is a mega tank, so I mean, this is a lot of damage. This is probably the most damage that you can take from anything that isn't a mega tank. They can't hit air units at all. Like you can see that it doesn't attack this. It can't attack the helicopter. The battlecopter can't attack the bomber either. So that's important, that bombers, like fighters, are mostly invulnerable to other types of units. Battlecopters can't attack fighters either. But super good late game unit. Build it sparingly, it's expensive. Here you go. This is the stealth. The stealth is like a bomber and a fighter. and it also has this nice feature where it can become unseen. So I have this other stealth over here to show you this feature. So you can see the stealth, this stealth here. I'm going to move and hide, so you can see that he's become invisible. And you can't see it unless you move over it. So the stealth is right here, but I'm going to try to move all the way down. You can see that this stops my movement and it makes me unable to attack, which is a really big deal. Once it's hidden, it can't be attacked by most other units. So like even this anti-air can't attack this stealth because it's hidden. The only thing that can attack hidden stealths are fighters and other stealths. Nothing else will. Is this missile in range? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, this missile is in range, but oh no, this missile is not in range. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, no, it's not. This missile wouldn't be able to attack it because it's hidden. So, very, very powerful unit because of how it is basically invulnerable while it's hidden. The main limiting factor on stealths is their fuel. They drain tons and tons of fuel when they are stealth. 8 fuel per day, and I think 5 fuel per tile that it flies. And it only has a maximum of 60. So if it's trying to traverse the map where it's most strong, it will run out of most of its fuel. But it's not so hard to deploy it with an APC or to just fly it over a friendly airport from time to time. And you are basically forced to build a 20,000 funds fighter in order to deal with it. That's like you have to do it. And so they're banned in a lot of games because of how centralizing they can become. Rightfully so. This is a black bomb. It's not a unit that is allowed in the vast majority of games. It has a ridiculous amount of movement. It doesn't fight. You can see that it doesn't do anything like that. But what you can do is you can move it somewhere and explode it. You can see that it hits this big range. And it deals 5 damage to anything, friend or foe, in that area. But that is extremely busted. So there's a couple things about this, is that normally when you take damage that fills your CO power, but because this is non-combat damage, it doesn't. This attack probably dealt more than 100,000. I actually could have watched that and I should have paid attention to how much funds it drained. This is an insane amount of funds for an attack to drain. This is beyond the pale in terms of power. So as a result, black bombs are basically not allowed in any kind of game you'll be playing on Advance Wars by Web. You don't have to worry about them too much. Ports. Ports build boats. Boats can only travel in sea tiles. There's some that can walk on shoals. To refuel boats, you have to be on a port. The port is both a land tile and a sea tile at the same time, which is kind of confusing. But this is the only way to repair it. Boats do benefit from terrain stars. So reefs give 1 star of defense and ports give 3. So if you park a boat on a port, it's very, very tanky generally. Tanks can mostly attack boats, but they're not very good at it. Infantry can't. Some planes can attack some boats, but not always. We'll get to it. Black boats are a transport ship. They can move on these shoal tiles. They can move 1 infantry or mech. The interesting thing about black boats is that they have the ability to heal other units, like the same way that a APC resupplies, it can heal a unit. You do have to pay for the heal. It can only heal 1 HP per turn, which is not very much. It's a more cost-efficient transport ship than the Lander, which is the next unit we'll talk about. It also moves 1 tile farther. I didn't realize that, but that's pretty busted. Is that true? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. The lander, it can move on shoals as well. It can transport 2 of any kind of unit of any kind of grounded unit. So you can put your medium tanks in here and move those around. That's pretty good. But other than that, it's basically just a worse version of the black boat. It's very expensive for what it does. It's 12,000 to be able to move other expensive units, and if it sinks, then the other units sink with it. Any transport, if any transport's destroyed, all the units inside it are destroyed. The cruiser is a combat boat. It can't attack other cruisers, but it can attack submarines. It's a good anti-air. If the cruiser is able to attack like a copter, then it's very effective, as you can see, but it also kind of works in reverse. Dealing 50 to 60% is pretty significant. It still hits back pretty hard, but 2 copters will destroy a cruiser. 2 copters I do not think destroy an anti-air. Yeah. So, strange thing. Boats are none of these boats are almost ever worth it, by the way. That should be something that I preface this, is boats aren't very good. Battleships are pretty good. Battleships are like rockets. They hit very hard. They can destroy all sorts of things. They can't attack air units. They have big ranges. Yeah, there you go. That's 6. It's 2 to 6 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Then, so they're pretty devastating. They're very tanky. If you park one on a port, then it's very hard to deal with. But if like tanks are attacking it and you have to repair it all the time, it's going to be pretty sad for you. It's very expensive. Subs are the original stealths. They're decent at attacking other boats. They're like an anti-boat boat. They can hide just the same way that stealths can. I'm not going to show that again because you already understand it. Subs are really only practically used for destroying like other subs and the ranged boats, battleships, and carriers. So that's not so good. Carriers, I don't really know what to say about carriers. I had to learn some things about carriers. They have like a super far anti-air range. They're like missiles. You can like store planes in them, which is weird, that like you can like load up a plane and you can like move it around. They have a super far range, which is crazy. What is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's like 3 to 8. That's nuts. But it's like a 30,000 fund missile boat, and that's not probably what you want to spend 30,000 funds on. So yeah, that's all the units. Main things to take away here are tanks are really good. Please don't base skip, build infantry if you can't afford anything else. Just wait to buy expensive units. That's fine. You probably need an anti-air spread out among your tanks so that battlecopters don't destroy them. Build artillery instead of rockets. Late game units need to be protected. Ban black bombs in all the games you create. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Good luck.